All right, well, welcome to our HD9 remote class that we're doing. The first thing we're going to get going on is turning our machine on and plugging in our foot pedal. So over here, I should have a port for my power, and this power button is shaped, and so it does need to go in one way and not the other. And then once it's plugged in, I can go ahead and turn the machine on. The power cord is distinct. It's got 3 ports, and so it does go in also a specific way, and its port is right next to our power cord. So next, we are going to wind a bobbin and thread our machine. So to wind a bobbin, I am going to use the bobbin that's already in the machine. There's a latch on this case. I pulled it up to disengage the bobbin so that I could go ahead and take my bobbin out. Now, you will want to do this on an empty bobbin. There are people who wind color on top of color. They don't fully empty a bobbin before they fill it again. I do not advocate that you do that. It can lead to tangling between the 2 threads. Always wind onto an empty bobbin. Okay, so our bobbin is going to sit up here on this bobbin winding pin. That said, I will put it on there as the last thing I do, and you'll see why. All right, let's change our thread, and let's take a moment to talk about thread, because this is a really cool machine. It can do a lot, but it still has preferences about thread. So the first preference I'm talking about is how a thread is wound onto the spool. So here I have 2 examples. This is an older style of winding, and it's variegated so that you can see really well that it's just straight lines all the way across that thread. This is called a stack wound thread, and it prefers to sit upright and come off horizontal, just like that. Okay. Compared to my other spool, this has X's, and it's a little more subtle, but it is wound into X's across the core of the spool. This is called cross wound, and this is designed to sit still and come off either vertical or horizontal. But you can see whichever way the spool is sitting, that's the axis in which the thread comes off, unlike the stack wound, which comes off perpendicular to the axis of the spool. Okay, why is this important? Well, if we take a stack wound thread and we treat it like a cross wound, and we try to make it repeat that sort of coming off sideways motion, it does it, but it's actually twisting while it does so. And so we can get wiggly stitches, weird tension, and more thread breaks if we treat our stack wound like a cross wound thread. On the HD9, we have 2 options. It's very convenient. For stack wound threads, I just go directly over to this guide right here. And that way, it's coming off, it's spinning, it's perfectly happy. Okay. For cross wound threads, which more and more threads these days are cross wound, this is typically what you will find. In this case, it's going to run upward to my guide. And this way, it's sitting immobile. If it's hopping around, I can add a spool cap on top of it, but really, gravity's going to keep that in place. Okay, and then from there, I can go down to my guide, but this way, it's coming off in the same axis it's sitting. That's how it is happiest. Okay, so you just make the decision based on the thread you are using. For this class, I will be using my cross wound, so I will be going up to my guide. Okay, so winding a bobbin. We have a really nice chart printed on top of the machine that talks you through how to wind both a needle and a bobbin. So for the bobbin, usually they recommend that you use the 2nd pin. It doesn't matter. They offer you 2 so that you can wind a bobbin while you still have your machine threaded for sewing, but it really doesn't matter which one you're using. So it's going to have me skip this little guide and come straight over to my tension disc. You're going to hear me say the word tension disc a lot in this class because every single time we have thread running through the machine, it is in some sort of tensioning system. So the bobbin tensioning system is this here, which I call a cup and a saucer. We've got a cup on top and a saucer on the bottom. I need to go right between the cup and the saucer. And you can see I've got 2 hands on the thread, and it's like you're flossing it into your teeth because there's resistance between there, and you have to give it a little bit of force to get it in there. If you are loosey-goosey one-handed, you're not actually going to get your thread into the tension discs. Okay, once I've got it in, I pull on it. It's got some tension to it. It's a little harder to pull. Now I can come over. I grab my empty bobbin. Remember, this is supposed to be empty. And I stick the thread up through the hole in the top of the bobbin. These bobbins do not have a right way or a wrong way. If you're coming from another brand, you might be used to them printing their brand name on one side, and they would tell you that that side goes up. These do not matter which way is up. They both have a hole cut into them. You just have to get that thread through a hole one way or another. All right, so I've threaded my thread up through the hole in the top of the bobbin, and I went ahead and put it on the pin. Now, if you're really cool, you actually hold the pin still and rotate the bobbin until there's a little wire on this pole and it clicks into that hole in the bobbin. I am not that cool. It actually doesn't make a huge difference in the winding of the bobbin whether or not you get that wire lined up with the hole. It's supposed to give you a better grip on your bobbin. I don't find it is necessary. What is necessary is holding this thread up above the bobbin while we start winding. And remember, my bobbin is supposed to be empty. So I push that guy over, and I've got a little bobbin winding button right here on the front of the machine. I push that, and it immediately starts winding. Okay, it's going to try to yank this thread out of your hand. So you have to be the boss here. You have to be in control. Don't let it yank it away from you. The reason we're holding it up like this is to keep it from tangling and creating a knot at the end of our bobbin, which when you're sewing and you reach the end of that bobbin, you don't want to hit a knot and suddenly come to a screeching halt and do this huge gathering effect on your project. So this is going to give us a nice clean end. Once I've gone up and down a couple of times, I clip it as close to the hole in the bobbin as I can. That tail shouldn't really bother anything, just being as small as it is. At this point, I continue winding, and when I reach the full point, this little buffer will pop automatically back and stop you. If for some reason it doesn't pop back, you can just watch your machine, and as soon as it starts fighting the rotation of the bobbin, as soon as the bobbin starts moving in jerky motions, you can go ahead and stop that yourself. Okay. Okay, so now I've got my bobbin wound, and of course I would have a full bobbin. This is a good time to mention something about the bobbins. It has a little number engraved here. There are actually 2 versions of the HD9. The current version, so the black edition, is called version 2, and it is better, so good job if you got a version 2. It's just quieter is what it is. To know if you have version 2 or version 1, it should be printed on the back of your machine next to the serial number. It should say V2 or V1. The reason I bring this up is they actually use different bobbins, and the bobbin case is slightly different. So when you go to get bobbins, it's a good idea to call in and ask us to remind you what number of bobbin you should be ordering. If you have a version 1 or a version 2, you get different bobbins. All right. So putting the bobbin into the bobbin case. So the bobbin case has an outside and an inside. The inside has this blue spring inside. It's not a bad idea to examine that or take a photo of it in case it ever falls out, which it is certainly possible that it might fall out. That way you'll have a nice reference for which way it goes back in. Okay. When I put the bobbin in, it needs to rotate clockwise as I pull on the thread. So the bobbin itself is rotating clockwise right now. Some people choose to think about this as it makes a Q for quilt. I've got a head of a Q and a tail of a Q, not a P, which would be the reverse. Okay, so once I've got my Q, I can just drop it into the bobbin case. Now, on the bobbin case, there's a big gap on top, but other than that, the rest of the edge of this is seamless, except for one little slit. That's what we're aiming for. You take the tail, you draw it into the slit, and then I have to pull to get it under this spring. It gets under that spring and into the opening right there. I'm going to do that one more time for you. Okay. Again, my bobbin needs to be rotating clockwise as I pull on it. Drop it in, find the slit, pull it into the slit, and then a little bit of pressure to pull it under that spring. That's the tensioning system for the bobbin. Again, all of our threads have some sort of tensioning system on them. And so that's why it's so important that it get under that spring. Okay, when I put it into the machine, the opening is going to be up. Simple way to think about it. The needle's got to go down, and so it has to have an opening to go into. So that's why it faces up. The latch is going to sit at a slight angle. Now, on my machine, I'm going to reassemble it for us so that I can disassemble. On my machine, the bobbin area is down here. This table conveniently has a little piece that flaps up, and then this metal piece is a puzzle piece, and it just pops out. Okay, now I can hold my bobbin case, and I'm going to insert it sideways into the machine. I do not use the latch as a handle. That latch is how I disengage the bobbin case to take it out. If I hold that and put the bobbin case in, I'm actually disengaging it at the same time I want to be engaging it. And so I run the risk of halfway engaging the bobbin case. You should be able to hold on okay just around the outside of the bobbin. And then I usually have to stick my big head in here to look around. Okay, get it started. And then you can wiggle it a little bit to find the right spot where it wants to pop in, and it makes a satisfying click when it pops in. Let me see if I can get you to hear that. There we go. That's a good click. That's the kind of click you want to hear, and that's the kind of click you don't hear when you're lifting that latch. So that's why it's so important. Okay, now I can close that up. Put this in. I do have a bobbin tail down there. The only thing I have to worry about with that tail is I don't want to catch it in front of the bobbin and then wedge it. As I put the bobbin case in, I don't want to wedge the tail between the hook and the case, essentially. So I need that tail to be just kind of dangling off to the side where it won't get caught as I insert the bobbin. We're going to take care of that bobbin tail in a moment, but we can forget about it for now. Now we're going to thread the machine. Okay, so to thread the machine, there are two threading methods that are very, very similar. One is for regular sewing thread, and then the other one adds extra tension for very thick threads, because this is a like upholstery grade machine, and it should be able to do very thick threads. First, I'm going to show you the sewing thread version, which is kind of the most common one that people use. Then I'll show you the upholstery thread variation, and then I'll rethread myself for sewing again, so we'll get another look at the sewing thread threading because it can be a lot. Okay, so first step, again, I can start off by following my picture printed on top. I go down to this guide. If I was using my stack wound thread, I would start by going to this guide and I would skip the retractable thread guide up there. Okay. I skip the bobbin tensioning system. This is for the bobbin only. It's not how we tension our top thread. Okay. Next, it comes directly over here. I call this my barbershop pole because we're going to do a little twist around it, like a barbershop pole. I enter the furthest hole out, and then I draw the thread over the top, and I enter the last hole. And sometimes it gets a little tangled, and so as it tightens, I just make sure it goes correctly over the top. So through, over the top, and then through the second hole. It's an extra tensioning measure if you want to go through that second hole. You could do 2 loops in your barbershop pole, but I really just do 1, and that is all that our manual tells us that we need to do. Okay, our presser foot needs to be up when we're threading, because that controls my tensioning system for the top thread. When it's down, that tension system is engaged to give us tension on our top thread while we're sewing. But if it's closed, there's no way that my thread is going to get between them correctly like it needs to. So presser foot is up, my tension disc's open. Okay, next thing I do is I go through this pre-tensioning guide right here. This has a twisty screw on it. It even has a mark on the plastic cap. That mark is probably meant for some other machine. This is probably kind of a universal part that they've adapted for this machine because there's no position that this needs to be in. That mark is meaningless, essentially. So I go in between the two discs right here and down. Now, I've got two discs down here, and I am going right between them, and then I am drawing back up until I can go behind this wire. A little hard to see with this black on black, but there's a wire right here. And I drew my thread all the way up and around until I could enter it from the open side of the wire, which is the side closest to me. And that's going to give us a little bit more tension there. Okay, now I zag back down. So I went up, caught my wire, and then back down around this little hooky. And here is the variation. This is where we're going to differ when we thread for upholstery. But for now, we're just going to do our sewing thread variation. I hook into this little guide here, and then I come up to the take-up lever and poke my thread through. Okay. And on the way back down, I get right back into that same guide. It's a dual-purpose guide. In this case, goes up and down, just like that. Okay. And then we go down to our above needle guide, which is right here. Now, I do have some pictures here. They are small, but they're enough to give you a reminder if you've already threaded it once or twice. The one we just did is the sewing thread variation. You can see it's the lighter red color on that line versus the upholstery thread, which is thicker. It's a much thicker line that they have drawn with. Okay, at this point, I'm going to rethread for upholstery. And I'll go a little quicker this time. Okay. So we start out the same. Down to my guide, over to my barbershop pole, in the closest hole, take a flip around, in through the third hole, around my pre-tension guide, straight down to my tension discs, up and around so that I catch that latch wire, down around that hook, and here is the variation. On extra thick thread, we need extra tension, and so now I poke it through this hole and this hole. This is going to give us some extra tension on that thread, just like that. Now I go up to my take-up lever. On the way down, I catch it into my guide, and then I'm straight down into my above needle guide right there. Okay, so the only difference is, am I going through this guide twice, or am I taking a little detour to add some extra tension? All right, last time, I'm going to thread it again for sewing. Down to my guide. Twist. Come here. And tweezers are sometimes not a bad idea for that. So here we can see somehow I got a little tangled. I tied a knot back there, but now I can slide that loop up and over, and I undid my knot that I had tried to tie. Okay, pre-tension guide. Tensioning up and around that wire, down, up, through the guide, up to the take-up lever, whoops, don't get caught like that, down back through the guide, and above needle guide. Okay, so now we're ready to thread our needle. We have one more guide to enter, and I believe the opening, looks like the opening is on the right side of the needle. All right, now I'm in both of those guides. Now I'm ready to use my needle threader. The needle threader is helpful, but it's not going to be helpful to you unless you do it correctly. I have some specific steps that I go through. So first thing, I lower the presser foot. It was up while we were threading because we needed our tension disc to be open, but now we're threaded into our tension disc, so I'm not worried about that. I lower the foot, and most importantly, I raise the needle using the hand wheel on the side. It goes to its highest position. Some people choose to do this doing the needle up down button. They go down and then up, which is fine. I personally raise it with the hand wheel because I can get that needle a little bit higher. Okay, now this is my needle threader. I push down on it and it lowers to a set level and swings around and pushes a hook through the eye of the needle from the back. The back of my needle actually sits to the right. So for people coming from other domestic sewing machines, you're used to the back of your needle being towards the back of the sewing machine, and you're used to your bobbin going in a different orientation. These industrial machines, the back of the needle sits here, and as we saw, the bobbin goes in sideways. So it's just something to remember when you're inserting your needle, the back of the needle goes over here. Okay, so this is going to come in and swing around. This is a bit fussy. We have to get this thread to go sideways. And so there is a little arm over here that you are welcome to use to help that thread go sideways. Otherwise, some people just take it directly down and bend around those two metal guides right there. Either way you choose to do it, the effect is the same. We need the thread to go just under the two metal guides that are straddling the needle. If we do this correctly, as I let go of the needle threader, it's going to pull that thread through the eye of the needle as that hook retracts. So we can see I have a little loop. I grab the loop and I pull the rest of the tail through. If I pull on the tail, I undo what I just did. So you have to grab the loop. I'm going to do that again. Okay, so I fully engage the needle threader. This is another common error. If you're not fully pushing it through, the hook is not through the eye of the needle and you won't ever thread your needle. So you have to be careful that you're not a little bit too far back. You got to push that thing all the way forwards. Okay, I'll do the other variation. I catch it just directly under those two metal guides, gently draw back through, and let it pull a loop through. Okay, and then sometimes it's a little stuck. There we go. Okay, last common issue I see is people are holding their thread, their tail over here, which you have to in order to get it to grab it, but they're holding too tight. You actually need it to pull slack through in order to get that loop to form. If there's no slack, you won't ever pull a loop through. Okay, enough of me telling you what I think. Well, let's go ahead and get sewing. All right, last step is we're going to get our bobbin thread up here. So this is a classic. I hold onto my top tail. I rock my hand wheel down and back up. Essentially, I just manually stitch to stitch. I give it a little yank, and then my bobbin thread is peeking up here, and I can go ahead and grab it and pull it through. Again, you can do that with your needle down, needle up. The effect is sew a single stitch manually to pull that up. All right, so now let's talk about how else do I set my stitch. So this is a straight stitch only machine. There's no needle position to worry about. There's no stitch width to worry about. The only adjustments we can make are to stitch length and presser foot pressure. So my stitch length, when it comes from the store, will likely be set somewhere between 2 and 3. My stitch length value is recorded over on the right side of the machine, has a handy dandy little symbol next to it with a dashed line getting longer. That's how you know it refers to stitch length. It is controlled by a dial directly to the right of this guide. There's a big hand wheel up here, there's a little dial sitting right next to the stitch length, and as I turn it, that value changes. So let's take a look at our default. I'm going to put it at about 2.5, which is pretty standard across sewing machines. Okay, so there's a mid-length. Let's see what my basting stitch looks like. I turn the dial until I see the number 6. That's as long as we can go. Now, you'll notice I'm currently stopping with my needle up. This indicator light here next to my needle up down is lit in the up position, so that's where I'm going to stop. If I push this button, now the down arrow is lit. That's where I'm going to stop now. There we go. So this light will tell you if you're set to stop down or up. I like to stop down because then my needle holds all my layers together and I can raise the presser foot and rotate without my fabric slippy sliding around. I'm using the knee lift for this. So the knee lift is really cool. Let's take a moment to talk about that. This is a flange that fits into a matching notch down here, and it just takes a bit of wiggling about to find where it wants to go in, and it will kind of plug into a certain depth. And then when I push it to the right, it raises my presser foot. It used to be that these knee bars would actually run the machine. That is no longer what they do. They just lift our foot. It's a nice hands-free access so that I can be holding my project together with two hands and still be able to lift my foot and rotate. Okay, so there's our basting stitch. Nice and long, easy to rip out. I can go pretty darn small too. In fact, I could go to 0 if the occasion called for it. I'll show you about a 1/2 millimeter here. All right, really teeny tiny, we can see right there. Okay. Now, the top speed of the machine is controlled by the slider. This is an industrial machine and it goes really, really fast. So I'm teaching this with it at its slowest speed. To get access to the full speed of the machine, I just slide this all the way to the right, and now if I floor it, I'm going to go really, really fast. And I think it's a good idea in this case to stay on a pretty short stitch length. There we go. There's top speed. So you can go crazy if you want to. All right, so if I want to lock my stitch, I've got a big reverse lever over here. I'm going to sew forwards a couple stitches, and then I start pressing the reverse button and I sew backwards. And when I want to sew forwards, I simply release the lever and it sews forward again. So there we saw two versions. I can stop and then depress the lever, or I can depress it while I'm sewing. Both are an option. At the end of my seam, I love that I have the scissors here that cuts my thread. Okay, so it's going to cut 2 little tails in there, and that's why locking your stitch is nice. If I had stopped right where I had locked it, there'd be no possibility of this coming undone. As is, that first stitch could definitely come out a little bit and it starts to unravel a little. So it's nice to cut really close to where you lock stitched. Now, something to know about cutting. Now that I've cut, I'm going to start another seam. And I'm going to flip it over. So on the back here, there's the smallest little tangle, and in fact, that just undid itself. But sometimes you'll get a little bit more of a tangle back here. That is standard with thread cutters like this. That's just a function of part of that bobbin thread being inaccessible to us and tangling when it starts sewing. Often you can undo it, and actually that one undid itself without a problem. But sometimes the tangles are a little more serious. If it is a seam that's going to be visible and it is crucial that there is no tangle on the back, you're going to want to do what we started with, which is hold the top thread, manually sew a stitch, and then pull the bobbin thread to the top. And mine, it looks like mine's even too small to pull it up. So what I would have to do is take the bobbin case out, pull a little more bobbin tail out, put it back in, and then grab that longer bobbin tail and pull it up. That's the only way to avoid getting that little tangle. That's perfectly normal. It doesn't show that something's wrong with your machine. In fact, all brands of sewing machines that have cutters end up with that little tangle. Okay, this is a great chance to talk about the final alterations we can make to your machine. We've got a tension dial and a presser foot pressure dial. The tension dial is the most important. Okay, so tension is regulated using this tension dial. It is literally a screw that pushes these discs closer or further apart. The way the tension disc works is the discs in here squeeze together and they add tension to the thread. And that tension is going to pull the looping between the top and bobbin thread up or down in between the fabric. I know where I am because there's an edge to this twisty guy. If I look in the gap right there, there's actually an edge. I'm going to see if I can't point that out for us. Right And this does move around a little bit. That's fine. It's right there. It's pretty hard to see, but I promise, not on camera, if you get your head in there, you should be able to see a shiny reflective surface and then a gap, essentially. So the edge determines which number we're lined up with. This goes from 0 to 8. Even though the 0 isn't marked, we could go slightly past 1. 4 is going to be standard. Anywhere like 3 and 4 is standard. So I can twist in all the way up to 8. I can twist out all the way out to 0. Now, the theory of tension is worth talking about because this is the #1 thing that we have control over that affects the quality of our stitch. To talk about tension, I want you to imagine that we're looking at our fabric edge-on with 2 layers, and we're going to zoom in on those 2 layers. So here's that blown up way of looking at the 2 layers, top and bottom fabrics. The way a stitch forms, the needle comes down through both layers, and it's taking a top thread with it. When it gets down to the bottom, the bobbin thread loops with it, and the top thread comes back up. Now, the tension on the top thread will determine how high up this looping is pulled. And so in an ideal world, the tension on the top thread pulls that bobbin thread looping into the middle of the fabric. What we should see in that case is a balanced stitch where I have a clear stitch forming on both sides of my fabric. Now, it's very common to get the effect we're seeing here, which is a little dot at the end of each line. If you can't quite see that, I'm going to draw it here on my paper. So this is very common. We've got stitch, 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 and a tiny dot in between. That is perfectly normal and nothing to be worried about. That's just that loop. It has nowhere to hide, especially on very thin fabric, and it shows a little bit on each side. As long as it's balanced and you have a clearly defined stitch on both sides, that dot is perfectly fine. Let's look at something that's not perfectly fine. What if my tension is too low? So tension too low would mean, for instance, in this case, I'm going to put us all the way out towards 0 as far as I can. Looks like I stop a little bit past the 1. What I've done is I've unscrewed my tension discs. When they close, when I put my foot down, they're going to be sitting further apart than before. So they're not going to put as much tension on my top thread. What will happen is my top thread's going to come down to the bottom of the fabric, and then it loops the bobbin thread. There's no incentive for it to pull up at all. It just sits right where it was set by the needle. And so what I should see is top thread on the bottom. And we're going to see if I can make this machine do that.
And boom.
Okay, so I should have a stitch that looks pretty good on top, but on the bottom you can see it is a mess back here. Now this is a very drastic result, and machines have different personalities. Yours might not give you quite this drastic of a result. It might be more like individual loops instead of this giant tangle. However, this is not unheard of. So basically all of this tangle is top thread. I happen to be very close to matching my bobbin and my top thread, but my bobbin is actually blue, so there's a very slight difference we can see. The bobbin thread should be blue like that, whereas we can see this is all bright white. This is all top thread coming through. Okay, so it's not my bobbin tangling. That's because there's no tension, it's all flowing through. That's a bit excessive. Let's try the other extreme. So I'm screwing this all the way in, and it's getting harder as I go, because again, this is literally a screw. Ugh. All right, that's about as far as I can go. So in this case, what I would expect is my top thread is very, very tight. It comes down, it loops the bobbin thread, and then there's so much tension on it that it pulls it all the way to the top of the fabric. Okay, so hopefully I would expect to see bobbin thread on top to demonstrate what it looks like when tension is too high. Okay. what we actually see is a really nice stitch on the top and an okay stitch on the bottom. In general, you do not see effects of tension too high. A straight stitch really resists showing the bobbin thread on top. Usually, where you would see a top thread on, or excuse me, the bobbin thread on the top is on a zigzag stitch. And so that doesn't pertain to us. We can't do a zigzag stitch. So in general, you're not going to see a tension too high effect with this machine. You should really be seeing tension too low. Now, what I hope this demonstration proves to you is that it is okay to go to the extremes of your tension. You do not break your machine. I got close to getting a tangle here, but it actually pulled through okay. Where you most likely will be going is tightening. So you'll start out at a 3 or a 4, and then if you go to a thicker thread, you'll probably need to tighten your tension a little, increase your tension a little. Again, I'm just looking at the edge. To get it to about 4. I like it right at 4. All right, so now to talk about presser foot pressure. This is my guide for how I know what pressure I'm at. And so I have this red line. It's telling me I'm a little bit above the 3 pressure. Really, anything between 3 and 5 is standard. Presser foot pressure refers to how hard that foot is pushing down on your fabric. And so a heavier pressure is actually more standard. It doesn't sit in the middle like tension does. And so I'm actually going to put this more like at 3.5. You don't really see the effects of presser foot pressure like you do on tension. Tension is very clear when you're messing with your tension. Presser foot pressure is a bit more nebulous. The idea is that generally you want a healthy amount of presser foot pressure. That's why it's usually higher rather than lower. This is adjusted just by screwing this screw on top. Again, you're loosening it. I'm literally lefty-loosey here to loosen it, righty-tighty to increase the pressure. The place that I mess with my presser foot pressure is on thick, squishy things like a quilt. So what happens on thick, squishy things is there's a lot of depth for the foot to squish into. And when it squishes down so far, what happens is as you advance, you push this big ripple of top fabric along with you. And I find I'm successful at decreasing that big ripple if I loosen my presser foot pressure almost all the way. That way the foot doesn't sit quite so deep and it doesn't squish quite a big ripple. Now, on very thick things that are dense, you may actually have to increase your presser foot pressure. And so it is not a cut and dried science the way that tension is. It's something that you can play around with, or it's something that you never have to touch. I consider presser foot pressure to be an optional change. All right, so believe it or not, that is basically it for the basic operation of this machine. There are other attachments and feet that you can buy. If you want to swap out your feet, all of these HD9 feet are what are called full shank feet. What that means is this sole does not pop off. The entire piece comes off. And so that is controlled with this screw right here. And so to put on, for instance, a walking foot, you need to undo this screw and then pop the appropriate foot on right here. You also have a plate here with screw holes for additional attachments like a movable guide that can screw into here. What I want to talk about though is cleaning and maintenance. So you have a couple of oiling points on this machine. You've got 2 on top, one here and one here, okay? And if you're using this very heavily, so let's say you're using it 8 hours a day, you could put a drop in every single morning when you start sewing. However, a lot of us are not doing quite that level of production, and so you could put a drop in every 2nd or 3rd day that you do a little bit of sewing. The other oiling point is down here. So I open up my hatch, pop this puzzle piece off, and we're going to try to point out those points to you. One is this wick right here that I'm going to poke at with my scissors. It's kind of yellow, it's kind of spongy. That's a wick. You need to put a couple of drops in there, and then your hook system. So your hook system is what your bobbin case sits in, and so that's over here. There's the pin that your bobbin case sits on, and then there is a rim that this hook rotates on. And so a drop of oil, grab my oiler, here it is. A drop of oil right there is great. And that's going to get the oil onto that rotating portion right there. Okay. So those are my 2 bottom oiling points. Again, once a day if you're very intense about your use, once every couple days if you're not. So tools of the trade. This is the oiler pen that I use. This has a really nice syringe tip. It's easy to get in there and access that. We do sell these. It's full of just sewing machine oil. Please do use sewing machine oil designated as such. Don't use your motorcycle oil, don't use car oil, whatever else you got laying around. As well, please be aware that oil does age. And so if it's more than 10 years old, it's probably doing less to oil and more to glue your machine together. So use a current oil that is labeled for sewing machines. Okay. Next tools we're going to be using, I've got my screwdriver and I've got a cheap brush from the hardware store because I'm going to be taking this plate off. I do not have to do this as frequently as I have to oil. This I would do every big project. Now, this screwdriver I have here is very useful because it's an angular screwdriver and I get a lot of torque with it. Sometimes these screws come from the hardware store. Sometimes these screws come from the factory super duper tight. And so sometimes I need to loosen them with that. There's no reason that when we tighten these back down that they have to be super duper tight. They have to hold the plate, but you do not need to crank them with Superman level strength. Tighten them as much as you can tighten, and that way you're assured that they are only as tight as you yourself can loosen next time you have to go clean the machine. Okay, I take those screws out, and that plate just pops right out. So this lets me clean a little bit of fluff that's going to accumulate in here. If you're sewing very fluffy things like cuddle, minky, or flannel, you'll accumulate fluff a lot more quickly. And you can actually cover your feed dogs, get between your feed dogs and the space they have to go down, and you can actually stop your machine from feeding correctly from the amount of fluff in here. So do clean it every big project. These cheap hardware brushes are super useful at getting in there. They're very grabby. If you want to use a Q-tip, that is great too. I recommend that as well. All right, so when I go to put this back on, it's just slops in there, and I'm going to tighten my screws back down. One more thing to mention, there is a specific needle that you want to be using. You want to be using HLX5 or HL times 5. These codes are printed on all needle packages, and so you just need to read your needle package, or better yet, just ask for help when you're at your local quilt store, because those are the high-speed needles, essentially, that you're going to be putting in this. That is it for our class. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope it helped.